Hello, I'm Sensei Alex Kaka. Thanks for joining me this evening for Dharma Sunday, where we take canonical Buddhist teachings and we tie them to real-world events. This evening, we'll be chatting about Nurses Week and the path of the Bodhisattva. Before we get into that, I'll remind you to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. That way you'll be notified each time I do a live stream. If you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that'd be great too. These teachings are offered free of charge, but if you'd like to make a contribution, information for PayPal and Cash App are in the description. And if you want to do a deep dive into Buddhist training, check out my book, Perfectly Ordinary Buddhist Teachings for Everyday Life. It's available anywhere books are sold, and there's a link to a free sample chapter of the book also in the description for this talk. So I wanted to chat about Nurses Week because, one, it is Nurses Week, obviously. So I wanted to give a shout out to them. I think nurses and everyone in the healthcare field do incredible work. That's often not appreciated, but also is important because it's what allows our society to continue. So I'll be reading an article about Nurses Week, but I'll also be reading another article about the Bodhisattva path, what it means to be a bodhisattva, how we can be a bodhisattva in everyday life. Because as I meditated this morning about Nurses Week and what it means to be a healthcare worker, I also thought a lot about the bodhisattva path and how the two are conflated in many ways, but how that can also teach us, even if we don't work in healthcare, how to also be bodhisattvas as the Buddha called us to be 2,600 years ago. So with that in mind, I'll read one article first. This is from trustedhealth.com, and it's simply entitled Nurses Week. And it essentially just describes what Nurses Week is, why it's important, etc. When is Nurses Week 2021? By the way, this is published March 16th of this year, and the attribution is just the trusted team. Nurses Week 2021 will take place between Thursday, May 6th and Wednesday, May 12th, 2021. We celebrate Nurses Week every year from May 6th to May 12th to shine a spotlight on the incredible nurses, registered nurses, nurse practitioners, LPNs, and others across the country that have devoted their lives to the betterment of the lives of others. But what is Nurses Week? When did it begin? And how can you celebrate this year? What is Nurses Week and when is it? Nurses Week is an annual celebration of all that nurses around the world do for their communities. It's our time to recognize, appreciate, and invest in the nurses we know or work with every day, as well as the entire nursing industry as a whole. And while Nurses Week is inclusive of all nurses, there are some more specific celebrations throughout. May 6th is the first day of National Nurses Week. May 8th brings particular attention to student nurses on National Student Nurses Day. And May 12th is International Nurses Day and National School Nurses Day. All different types of nurses contribute to their communities in a myriad of ways all year round. This week is the time for these communities to show their support back to the nursing profession. Nurses Week 2020 was unlike any other. As a society, we asked more of nurses than we ever have by asking you to put your lives on the front lines in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. While 1 week is not nearly enough, we want to take this week every year to show our gratitude by offering our support for the work you do every day in times of crisis and always. What's different about Nurses Week 2021? With Nurses Week 2020, the 200th anniversary of Florence Nightingale and the year of the nurse and midwife behind us, what has changed since then? So far, not much. We're still grappling with the devastating pandemic, and frontline nurses and other healthcare staff are still struggling to care for an ailing population. That said, the American Nurses Association, ANA, has extended the Year of the Nurse and Midwife into 2021. And we again want to use this opportunity to highlight all that nurses are, have been, and will be in our society. 2021 is a time to celebrate the efforts made by nurses everywhere to improve health conditions globally, recognize and reflect upon the challenging conditions nurses face in practice, whether they be physical, emotional, or mental, and then take strides towards increasing and better caring for the existing nursing workforce. We're seeing nurses struggling with incredible challenges to their mental health and well-being, and we're still hospital systems pushed to the brink. But despite all this, nurses and other healthcare practitioners are continuing to step forward in support. They're not giving up, and they're not backing down. Plain and simple, nurses are doers, and they will keep on doing until everyone receives the care they need. Nurses Week 2020 was a tough one, but we promise that Nurses Week 2021 will be a week of celebration and of reflection. A reflection of everything we've been through this past year and of what we nurses truly are capable of. As traditional nursing roles expand in scope and nurses find themselves working in direct patient care or building healthier communities in a variety of other ways, there has grown an entirely new set of challenges for nurses to solve. Now more than ever, nurses are relied upon to use their unique skill sets to progress in ways that healthcare hasn't for decades. The focus of Nurses Week 2021. Given everything this year has thrown at nurses and other healthcare workers in the form of the COVID-19 pandemic, there isn't a better or more appropriate time to focus on recognizing, appreciating, and investing in our incredible nurses across the globe, serving on the front lines. While it makes sense and is of course appropriate to single out a particular week to give thanks to nurses, it should by no means stop there. After all, nurses work around the clock 52 weeks a year. Especially now, nurses are more deserving than ever of our support, respect, and appreciation. That's why we want to take Nurses Week 2021, another one to remember, and better than Nurses Week 2020 for all nurses stationed on the front lines of healthcare. We'll talk more about Nurses Week 2021 and this year's celebration in the coming weeks. But for now, let's take a look at the history of Nurses Week. Where did Nurses Week come from? It all began in 1953 when Dorothy Sutherland from the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare proposed a Nurse Day annually in October. Unfortunately, that day was never enacted. Although not long after 1954, the first Nurses Week took place from October 11th to 16th, marking the 100-year anniversary of Florence Nightingale's work in the Crimean War. However, this week was not yet an annual occurrence and would not appear again, at least in part, until 1974. In 1974, the International Council of Nurses, ICN, decided that May 12th, the birthday of Nightingale, would serve as International Nurse Day. Soon after, President Nixon declared that a week of February would be celebrated as National Nurse Week. Then, after a whirlwind effort by local governors and the ANA, a proclamation landed in front of President Reagan that declared May 6, 1982, the official National Recognition Day for nurses. And finally, in 1991, we welcomed the return of a week-long celebration of nurses when the ANA expanded the recognition of nurses to over an entire week, gaining the title of National Nurses Week. In 1993, the ANA Board of Directors agreed upon May 6 through 12 as the permanent and annually recurring dates of Nurses Week, dates and historical information courtesy of the ANA. And there's a hyperlink. And thus, the annual celebration of Nurses Week was born. What's the best way to celebrate Nurses Week 2021? And then they just give you their social media link. Finally, Nurses Week 2021 and the year to come. With multiple vaccines now approved and in the earliest stages of dissemination, hope is looming on the horizon. Yet, yes, we must keep pushing forward until we reach some semblance of normalcy, but it's close and getting closer by the day. It's finally the new year, and that means most of us are setting our intentions for the months to come. For 2021, we invite you to set the intention of spending more time caring for you. If 2020 taught us anything, it's that we are human and have our own limits to what we can withstand before experiencing dreaded nurse burnout. As nurses, we care for everyone around us, often neglecting our own needs. And frankly, the culture that glamorizes outworking ourselves needs to change. Nurses are incredible, and they are the core of the healthcare system. We are proud to do our part by connecting them with roles in which they can and do pursue in order to improve and save lives. However, it's not at no cost to them, and for that, there can never be enough thanks. So that's an article from Trusted Health discussing nurses and Nurses Week. And I want to read that because I think the healthcare profession, the nursing profession especially, is a profession that's very in keeping with the Bodhisattva vows. And those are sentient beings are numberless. I'll save them. Delusions are endless. I'll see through them. The teachings are infinite. I'll learn them. The Buddha way is difficult. I'll walk the path. It's also in keeping with right livelihood, which is one of the tenets of the Noble Eightfold Path. And we'll talk more about this later, but remember, there are 5 professions that Buddha said we as Buddhists should not take part in because they're just so harmful. The karma is so negative. There's really no redemption to be found. So that's the sale of weapons. That's the sale of poisons, the sale of intoxicants, slavery, and animal butchery. Those 5, as Buddhists, we shouldn't earn a living that way. However, if we're earning a living any other way that's not one of those 5, then we are in keeping with right livelihood. And you'll see why that's important in a second, but simply put, if what we're doing is in keeping with right livelihood, then it's a wonderful opportunity for us to practice the Bodhisattva vows to save all beings from suffering. So we don't need to be a nurse to be a Bodhisattva, though I think nurses definitely fit the bill. Anyone in keeping with right livelihood through their job can save all sentient beings from suffering. Now, before we dive deeper into that, however, I want to read one more article. This one comes from Lion's Roar, and it's a conversation where they really talk about what it is to be a Bodhisattva, what it is to walk the Bodhisattva path, and how we can live as Bodhisattvas in daily life. So, like I said, this comes from lionsroar.com. It's a conversation. It's called Awakening the Bodhisattva. It's a conversation between Taigen Dan Layton, I think that's how that's pronounced, and Klein, Ijo McMullen, and Venerable Panavati. It was published June 1st, 2018. And it goes like this. Bodhisattvas are beings dedicated to helping relieve suffering for all, realizing universal awakening and leading all beings to that same awakening. Such practice cannot be merely about self-help or personal salvation. Bodhisattva practitioners are those who realize their deep interconnectedness with all beings. Such realization might start from hearing teachings, but then becomes viscerally affirmed through meditative or devotional practices. Bodhisattva practitioners do not see all the suffering beings as other or separate. We are all Jesus, I need to drink something, clearly. Mouth's a little dry. We are all in this together. What are the implications of this for modern practitioners amid the many challenges we now face? Among many other traditional lists of Bodhisattva practices, we have the classic 4 vows: to free or save all the innumerable beings, to destroy all the numberless delusions, deeply ingrained in ourselves and our society, to enter all the boundless gateways to reality and teaching, to see all situations as opportunities for learning and practice, and to realize and express the way to Buddhahood. Such vows are inconceivable. They might seem abstract or even irrelevant compared to the practical problems involved in our everyday lives, not to mention all the issues in the world around us. Even as we take on pragmatic everyday projects, including noble, helpful ones, what could such inconceivable aims have to offer us? How could they be applicable to our lives? Bodhisattvas commit to staying open to the suffering in the world, but they must include themselves among the beings worthy of care. I'll read that line again because it's important. Bodhisattvas commit to staying open to the suffering in the surrounding world, but they must include themselves among the beings worthy of care. As individuals, we are beset with the personal problems from our habits of grasping and craving, anger and frustration, fear and confusion. How does one practically balance self-care with a deep commitment to be helpful rather than harmful? Everyone has aspects of their lives worthy of gratitude. To do this work, we must somehow sustain a practice of caring for suffering beings while also finding the joy and contentment to celebrate all that is wondrous in our lives. Our world also includes multitudes of systemic sources of suffering. We face the challenges of climate damage, seriously imperiling our habitat, the deep karmic legacy of racism, and the rampant injustice and inequality destroying many lives. Although these issues can seem overwhelming, Buddhism and history show that change does not happen. We do not know the outcomes. Change does happen. We do not know the outcomes. Just in the United States, popular movements going back to the abolitionists before the Civil War, women's suffrage a century ago, the Civil Rights Movement, and more recently Occupy, the gay rights movement, the climate movement, the Black Lives Matter, human beings have made a real difference in the world again and again. We have the ability to respond, and we have the Bodhisattva responsibility. In the dialogue that follows, three teachers from different traditions explore the ideal of the Bodhisattva, the path that it offers us, and the challenges and possibilities we might meet along the way. And it goes into the conversation. Forum, Buddha Dharma. We often speak of bodhisattvas and the bodhisattva path as being outside of Theravada practice and tradition. We pit bodhisattvas against arhats and leave it at that. How do you understand the notion of the bodhisattva in terms of the Theravada? And Venerable Panavati says, we shouldn't think in terms of Theravada versus Mahayana or Vajrayana or Arhat versus Bodhisattva. When we start dividing in this way, we get into dogma. But the Buddha was talking about actual organic experience. He said, how do we know a baker? A baker bakes. How do we recognize a bodhisattva? A bodhisattva shows concern for the world and responds to that concern with powerful words and actions. Throughout the Theravada teachings, the Buddha is showing us how he responds to suffering in the world. He asked his disciples, for what reason do you leave your home and go into the homeless life? Then he answers his own question, to be a refuge. You're a bodhisattva when you embark upon the bodhisattva path. That's what the Buddha taught. There's no way to be enlightened without recognizing our universal nature, our interconnectedness with everything. In that interconnectedness, we experience the pain, confusion, and neediness of others. As we develop our skillfulness, we automatically respond to that suffering as we would respond to our own, with compassion and with power. Then Buddha Dharma asks, how would you define a bodhisattva? And Klein answers, a bodhisattva is someone whose purpose is to benefit others in every possible way, especially to free them from ignorance and from bondage to a sense of self. In the early Buddhist tradition, the arhat known as Gautama Buddha was, of course, a bodhisattva. So Mahayana absolutely recognized that bodhisattvas are very important in the early foundational Buddhist traditions. The four immeasurables, the boundless states that are key means of cultivating bodhicitta in the Mahayana were deeply practiced in the early Buddhist traditions and are part of Theravada to this day. About 500 years after the Buddha's time, two seemingly contradictory ideas of Buddhahood developed. The Buddha becomes a more mythological figure with powers of extraordinary perception and the ability to appear in many different places at once. At the same time, the belief that anyone, male or female, monastic or layperson, could attain Buddhahood arose. This democratized the potential for practitioners in relationship to these increasingly superhuman depictions of the Buddha. The Mahayana idea that everyone can become that kind of Buddha or a Bodhisattva, someone who is capable of benefiting all beings, is a different idea about what human beings actually are and what consciousness actually is. You're a bodhisattva when you never waver from your powerful aspiration to be of benefit to everyone, not just in meditation, but throughout daily life, whether walking, standing, sleeping, or lying down. And that aspiration is not vitiated by people's bad behavior toward you or others. There are levels or bhumis of realization. You can be a bodhisattva who hasn't yet understood the ultimate. But even as you know you are not yet a full-on bodhisattva, everything in your life and in your practice is motivated by this aspiration. You want Buddhahood for everyone, and importantly, you believe it's possible for you. Joe McMullen states, the classical definition of a bodhisattva is a being who is on the path to awakening and who dedicates that path to the welfare of all beings. But how do we carry that textbook definition into day-to-day life? The power that an image can hold for spiritual practitioners as a sacred carrier of our intention or a place where the path can be realized is so crucial. Bodhisattvas are both archetypal and actual beings beyond our grasp. They offer an image that not only inspires us, but also mirrors our life back to us. This is kanondoko, or sympathetic resonance. We are moved by the image of the bodhisattva, and in being moved, we respond. Their way of walking becomes our way of walking. We live out the bodhisattva life in which all beings participate. The suffering of beings calls forth the response from bodhisattvas. In meditation, about trying to get our lives together, or is it the practice of awakening every being inside and outside of us? Every image, every idea in meditation can be considered a being that is also on the path. Our path is to be liberated with them. In this way, the profundity of the Bodhisattva path is alive within the practice of meditation. Bodhisattvas don't practice alone. Not practicing alone is the definition of practicing together with all beings. The whole world is constantly ablaze with the suffering of impermanence and no self. As we grab it, we are burnt by it. But if we can open our hand and recognize that the fire is us, the vitality of life can come through without that suffering. That's good. I'm going to read that again. The whole world is constantly ablaze with the suffering of impermanence and no self. As we grab it, we are burnt by it. But if we can open our hand and recognize that the fire is us, the vitality of life can come through without that suffering. Unless we're fully invested in the welfare of the beings of this world, we're not going to be able to have that insight. Otherwise, the desire to escape the world will always remain. Buddha Dharma asks, most of us enter the practice hoping for some kind of improvement to our own lives. How do we make the shift from practicing for ourselves to practicing for others? Venerable Panavati answers, we don't really make that shift from me to other. The shift is made for us in the cultivation of practice. It's like being on the shore and entering the ocean. As you wade into the water, the action of the waves begins to take over. And soon your feet aren't even touching the bottom of the current as the current begins to lift you. The qualities that begin to arise as a result of the practice are what take us to the path of hearing the cries of others and having the courage and desire to respond. You come to realize that when you're serving others, you are in fact serving yourself. But there's no thought of, I am serving or I am doing. There is just the doing that is the fruit of right cultivation. And Klein answers, the main method of the Mahayana is compassion. The very essence of wisdom is compassion. This compassion has a dissolving effect on our overly ramped up sense of meanness. Once we finally see that we are not the center of the universe, and that's a relief, We simply don't focus on ourselves in the same way. Indeed, all our practices in all Buddhist traditions, wisdom, compassion, attention, are oriented toward dissolving the sense of self that obstructs us from benefiting others. The Tibetan traditions also emphasize that this same exaggerated idea of meanness prevents us from recognizing our potential to become full-on Buddhas. With this in mind, it's important also to recognize that benefiting ourselves is not in any real sense in opposition to benefiting others, and vice versa. The benefits of the path, confidence, energy, joy, freedom from habits that limit our potential, are both important for us personally and just as important for growing into someone who can be of benefit to others. Mahayana practitioners pray to complete the enlightenment that is our own purpose, as well as to further the purpose of others, their enlightenment. That means we pray to realize that all of us, self and other, are waves in the same ocean. Once we stop clinging to the one wave that we call self and open up the whole ocean we're all in, the tension between benefiting oneself and benefiting others can begin to release. Ejo McMullen says, believing that we need to get rid of ourselves is a spiritual trap. Practice is really a matter of admitting that there is no self to begin with, and then living in such a way that we're not putting our self-concern at the center. In the Soto school, the emphasis on practicing with others asks us to leave behind our inclination, to do what we want in every moment. But that's different from saying, I'm trying to get rid of myself. The self has to show up for a shared place of practice to emerge. When I first entered the Soto Zen path formally, I wanted to get down to business. I wanted to meditate all the time, not deal with any of that fluffy, taking care of community stuff. I was fortunate to be among long-term practitioners from the beginning and have my bluff called on my idea of true practice. The whole of my life, my work as a school teacher, my role as a father and husband, all had to be included, which I most likely would have tried to turn from without that kind of guidance. I think for most people, right from the beginning, we need a teaching and practice that asks us to consider the fundamental problem of dividing the world into self and others. We may mature into being able to help others or care for others, but this maturation comes from walking the path with both feet, not trying to hop on one or the other. Buddha Dharma asks, the decision to take up Bodhisattva vows is often framed in almost heroic terms, or as a call to otherworldly effort. But it seems you're all describing something more relaxed and organic than that. Ejo McMullen said, I think that heroic aspect is very important, not only because of the superhero element that we gravitate toward in the Bodhisattva as we see as separate from us, but also because that quality of a great being is a quality we possess. An image that activates these parts of ourselves and asks us to step into the realm of myth is foundational to the power of the path. How are people going to be inspired? What's the inspiration to live a radical life of generosity, of vow in this buy and sell world? Without these images, we can be limited by the confines of our narrow ideas about what is possible. So I want to keep the hero piece. The problem of the hero is not the hero, but how we orient around it. If it just remains an external object, that misses the point. And Klein states, initially, the vow to save all beings can seem kind of insane and potentially ego-inflating, but the practice does have power. A natural unfolding gradually occurs where teachers have certainly emphasized effort a lot, and yet, particularly the more esoteric traditions, Nyingma, Mahamudra, highest yoga tantras, and so on, all agree we have to let go of effort. The task moves from conceptual to non-conceptual and from effort to ease. It's a paradox. We have to make effort to learn how to relax. Buddha Dharma then asks Venerable Panavati, do you think it's important for people to explicitly take up the idea of the Bodhisattva? Venerable responds, If people are practicing the true path, they don't have to take up something particular. They are transforming. They are becoming something. You can call it by some name or by no name. You don't even have to take a vow, you just do. A Mahayanist can get caught up in pride, thinking, I'm seeking the enlightenment of all beings, right? On the other side, Theravadins don't talk about it at all. But whether you call yourself by any name, sect, or lineage, or by no name, sect, or lineage, if you're on the path takes you there. It's the Buddha's path. As we move more deeply into the heart of the practice, where we shed all the limiting views that beset us, this becomes an organic process. Do your practice, and in the practice, that's an outcome. There is a fruit, and we can look at that fruit. We know a baker when he bakes. Buddha Dharma. As practitioners, how can we skillfully relate to traditional Bodhisattva representations like Avalokitesvara or Manjushri? And Klein states, initially, we see bodhisattvas as great beings and as inspiring symbols of wonderful qualities. They inspire us. They open us to a sense of wonder. By admiring them, we gain a very personal relationship with compassion and wisdom. Then, as we enter Dzogchen, Mahamudra, or Tantric teachings in the Tibetan tradition, we become increasingly oriented to seeing that the bodhisattvas and Buddhas are not external. They have always been part of us. They are not external. The externality is only skillful means until we get to a point where we've dissolved enough of the musculature that's holding on to our ordinary limited sense of self. It's like the ice cracking and the ocean seeping through. And the ocean is infinite. And you realize that Manjushri is really you, and your compassion is Avalokiteshvara. Manjushri being Monju, the bodhisattva of compassion, or the bodhisattva of wisdom in Japanese, and Avalokiteshvara being Kanan in Japanese. The bodhisattva of compassion. That discovery is a very important development in our practice. Perhaps it's the Tibetan way of saying, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. Extinguish that sense that you are not a Buddha. A.J. McMullen responded, the practice of veneration is central and vital. How do we become intimate with what it is to take up the path of liberation if we don't have ways to conceive of it? Human explanations tend to keep things too contained, so the idea that we should just get rid of the hocus pocus is a problem. When I encounter images of the bodhisattvas, I light a stick of incense and press my forehead to the ground. In front of the Buddha here at our temple, we have a small mirror. People tend to interpret that as meaning I'm bowing to the Buddha, but I'm also bowing to myself. I don't like that explanation very much. It's a bit too precious. Like the Buddha is another chance for privileged white people to talk about privileged white people's problems. When we approach veneration not as a way to ignore our life and try to become some sort of ideal, but to bring our broken selves to the altar, then a true call and response can take place. Venerable Panavati responds, images of the bodhisattvas can be valuable, but as I understand it, they were developed to get a person's imagination going. The object, of course, is not to see them as the bodhisattva as much as to see them as the embodiment of certain qualities and then impute those onto yourself. As a Theravadan, I can develop devotion around the quality itself, so I don't really need an image. When I'm arousing metta, I bring to mind an experience of when I felt someone's friendliness towards me, or when I felt the joy of that kindness myself. Once I have recalled that event, the feeling comes with that to arouse devotion around compassion, or around giving someone something without considering my own need. The Buddha said, my Dharma is hard to see. It's hard to understand, and it can be understood by it cannot be understood by mere reasoning alone. So when we try to focus our practice efforts on the intellect, we're missing the point. He is talking about the mind of the heart, the aspect that is readily touched by the infirmity of others. If we stay with that feeling, the heart widens, and then in relieving the suffering of others, we forget about ourselves. That's an easy way to meet non-self, because when we focus on the other, you're not thinking so much about yourself. The Dharma asked, Venerable Panavati mentioned earlier that perhaps we don't even need vow in order to actualize this path. But of course, in the Mahayana tradition, we associate bodhisattvas with vow. And in particular, we associate bodhisattvas with the vow to save or free all beings. How are we as human beings to understand a vow of that scale? A.J. McMullen said, how do we understand something that's so vast? I'd say we don't. That's the whole point. We can't. The awakening of Shakyamuni Buddha is beyond our ability to fathom. The truth is, we don't know the world. We don't even know our own body, much less the edges of what we call ourselves. The vow is asking us to deeply investigate the world in each meeting between ourselves and another being. That meeting can be a meeting of liberation, or it can be a meeting of co-opting or capitulating, getting someone on board for what we want, or at least our idea of how things are, or giving in to theirs. But that's the engine of samsara. Right in that meeting, the truth of awakening is also present. That's where this vow of all beings doesn't sound impossibly huge to me. It sounds like the immediacy of this life. Inclined response, in Tibetan, the noun vow is rooted in the verb to bind. Vows bind us in the sense that we commit to behaving in ways that are consonant with the urgent, compassionate aspiration we cultivate. Rousing our bodhisattva intention begins with a sense of awe, effort, and wonder. We think, can I really do this? Am I crazy? How is this going to be possible? In order to believe we can do it, we have to feel that there's something in us that's not constrained by our ordinary sense of self. The binding of chosen vows serves to free us from the unconscious cage of habitual behavior patterns. Some people can go on faith and just say, the Buddha says I can do this, so I will. But here is where I think many modern practitioners may feel doubtful. But there are ways to move through doubt. We can try to find the self that so limits our possibilities. Venerable Panavati says, if I make a vow, who am I making it to? Am I making it to the Buddha? No, I am making it to myself. It all boils down to me, with or without precepts. As I start moving toward thoughts, speech, and actions that are wholesome, my wholesomeness will grow and expand. Although in the beginning it can be necessary to train with the mind, exerting itself towards aspiration, compassion will naturally arise, and we will be a bodhisattva, in fact, with or without the label. So the conversation continues, and I encourage you to read it on your own if you like. Again, it's at lionsroar.com. It's called Awakening the Bodhisattva, but in the interest of time, I think I'll stop there. And as I stop there, I'm trying to think how I want to start with my Dharma talk. So I'm going to take a drink of tea. It's a bit cold right now where I am, so warm tea is very pleasant. So this vow of the Bodhisattva, I'm going to save all beings from suffering. It can be very overwhelming, right? All beings, everyone, even the people I don't like. And even if we're okay with trying to save all beings, how do we save all beings? There's so much suffering in samsara. There's the climate crisis, and there's the pandemic, and then there's murders and robberies and wars, and where do I even start? And then because of the way things work in samsara, it seems you can't do anything without causing some harm or some suffering to someone, right? In a few weeks, I'll start harvesting vegetables from my garden, which will be wonderful. I'll have fresh food for my household, lots of lettuce and kale, garlic, etc. But if I had to guess, I'd say the garlic would prefer to stay in the ground. So happiness for my household is suffering for the garlic. We get packaging from things we buy and we throw it away and it ends up in the landfill. And of course, we would rather not create trash, but we have to feed ourselves. We need chairs to sit on. We need tables to do our work at. So how are we a bodhisattva? How do we save beings from suffering in a world that causes so much harm? That almost puts us in a place where we have to cause harm, whether we want to or not. And what I get from the conversation I just read in Lion's Roar, and what I see in the nurses who were celebrating in Nurses Week, is that we become a bodhisattva simply by making the vow to try, by paying attention and simply working to end suffering where we find it. Now, will we end all of the suffering? No. That's why the Bodhisattva vows are infinite and beyond scale and beyond imagining, because it's endless work. Even Kanan, the Bodhisattva of compassion, a celestial being with miracle powers, when she went into hell to save all the demons that were suffering there, she succeeded in emptying it for a moment. And then she blinked her eye, and once again, hell was refilled with demons. And her work began again. So we see from the example of archetypes like Amida, like Kanan, like Monju, that the Bodhisattva vows aren't something we're ever meant to complete. It's work we're meant to do every day, every moment of our lives. We make the vow to try. And how we do that can be so simple. And to understand how we do it, we first have to understand how and why people cause suffering and cause harm. Now, Buddhism tells us that suffering is caused by desire. And the way to end suffering is to end desire. And if we go deeper into that, we find that our desire is caused by ignorance. Ignorance of the conventional world. We don't see and recognize the karma of our actions, but also ignorance of the absolute. We don't understand that we are Buddhas. We do not understand that we are part of a larger Buddha body. So we act out of accordance with that, as was referenced in the article. I don't realize that my life and your life are the same, so I don't care for your life in the same way I care for mine. I don't pay attention. I actually experienced this a while back. I had a roommate who was a bit messy, and I just watched him one day. He was making oatmeal, and he was making the oatmeal, and we were chatting in the kitchen, and he made a bit of a mess because, you make a bit of a mess when you cook. And then he took all the dirty dishes and just left them there, somewhere in the sink, somewhere in the stove. There were oats on the counter, there were oats on the floor, and he just walked away. Just walked out the door, no thought of what he just done, the mess he just left. And this had caused some consternation in the house. There's a reason we're no longer roommates. And to be frank, this is one of them. But the reason I bring this up is because he wasn't a bad person. He had a lot of very admirable qualities, in fact, but he didn't pay attention. He didn't notice the karma of his actions. And so completely by accident, I do not believe this was malicious at all, he caused suffering for the other people who were living in the house. He didn't notice that, oh, there are crumbs on the floor, and if I leave these here, they'll attract rodents. Oh, my dirty dishes are in the sink, and if I leave them here, someone else will have to clean them, and that will cause suffering for them. So a very simple, easy way to fulfill the Bodhisattva vow, sentient beings are numberless, I'll save them, is to pay attention and clean up after ourselves. And that sounds so simple and easy, and well, doesn't everyone do that? Well, no. No, they don't. I can speak from experience. Not everyone does that. So something as simple as that, as I make a mess and I clean it up, saves all beans. I'm thinking of another neighbor I had, or sorry, not another neighbor, another roommate I had. I've had lots of roommates in my life. This was back in college, and he liked to play music very late at night. Again, very good person, lots of admirable qualities, but he would blast music at 3 a.m. while he was studying, and the rest of us were trying to sleep, which created suffering for me and others because I had 8 a.m. classes. So eventually the RA got involved and they talked to him about quiet hours and he stopped playing his music so loud. But this is another example where suffering is caused in some sort, not because people are evil or bad intentions necessarily, though I do believe obviously that evil exists. But I also believe that most of the bad things that happen in the world happen simply because people aren't paying attention. Because they're playing their music at night and not wondering, am I keeping people up? Because they make messes and they don't bother to clean up after themselves. This is where suffering comes from. That ignorance of our interconnectedness with other people. This ignorance of what our actions do to others. So if we're trying to be bodhisattvas, if we're trying to walk this Buddhist path, it really is as simple as paying attention. And when we notice something that, oh, I did something and it caused harm, we don't get mad at ourselves. We don't beat ourselves up. We just, okay, let me fix that. It's fine to make a mess as long as you clean it up. It's fine to listen to music as long as you wear earphones or you listen at a time in a place where other people are awake and want to listen to music. And we understand that this is an infinite, ever ongoing task, that we're never finished, any more than we're ever finished breathing or eating or sleeping. As long as I'm alive, I will do those three things. And as long as I'm alive, I will continue working to fulfill the Bodhisattva vow. And I really like that in the article, they talk about the hero aspect of the Bodhisattva. They talk about Kannon, they talk about Monju, and in that same category, we could talk about Amida and Jizo. And are these archetypes beneficial? And they are, because they embody something outside of ourselves. And when we recognize, oh, Kannon, the Bodhisattva of compassion, if we haven't developed that habit in our own selves to exude compassion in daily life, well, I see Kannon, and Kannon is outside of me. And I can act like Kannon until it just becomes habit. And then Kannon and I become one. When we look at Amida, the Buddha of infinite light, and how he created a pure land and people can go there after they die and have the optimal opportunity to practice Buddhism and realize enlightenment, that's outside of ourselves, right? But if we focus on that, if we venerate that, then what happens? Then slowly but surely we develop that habit to create these tiny mini pure lands all around us, whether it's our house or our office or a front yard. What can I do in this space right now to relieve suffering for myself and others, to create the ideal environment to realize enlightenment? It could be as simple as providing snacks on a road trip. As someone who's taken a lot of road trips in my life, I can tell you snacks are very important. And that simple act, we become Amida Buddha. He and I are one. There's no separation. And we realize that what these deities are doing is they're embodying portions of ourselves. They are simultaneously apart from us and a piece of us at the same time. But sometimes we need that outer representation in order to find it in us. We need the example. It's like the 4-minute mile in track. For a long time, people thought it was impossible. No way people will ever run a mile that quickly. 4 minutes? That's 1 minute to run a quarter mile. No way. And then one person did it. And then one person did it, and suddenly everyone was doing it. Now, everyone, human beings are human beings, everyone had the potential, but they had to see someone accomplish that feat before they were able to accomplish. In the same way, we need to see Kanaan, we need to see Jizo, we need to see Amida, we need to see the historical Buddha and read about them and learn from their example in order to realize that we too can be bodhisattvas in our daily life. And we can do it without miracle powers. We can do it simply by watering our plants. We can do it by checking on our loved ones. Today is Mother's Day. A wonderful opportunity to end suffering for mothers in our lives or other mothers we know, even if it's not our own mother, simply by, hey, happy Mother's Day. How wonderful is that? How lucky are we that this Bodhisattva vow is simultaneously so difficult and yet so easy all at the same time? That we don't need to be a celestial being with infinite miracle powers, that we can simply do things like wash the dishes in the sink, mow the lawn, say hi to our neighbor, show up to work on time so whoever we're leaving, they can leave on time and get back to their families. One thing I really like about Pure Land Buddhism, and then I'll wrap it up, and this teaching was given to me by Reverend Koyo Kubose, who's the president of the Bright Dawn Center of Oneness Buddhism, is that he offers the teaching that the Pure Land is not just something that exists outside ourselves in the afterlife, it also exists in this life. It's something that we have to purify our minds in order to see for ourselves. Are the clouds simply balls of vapor going across the sky, or are they devas? Is the tree just a plant, or is it a bodhisattva here to offer us shade? It all depends on the purity of our mind. And I've experienced this through my meditation practice. I've looked out the window and seen the Pure Land. And there have been other times when my mind wasn't so clean, wasn't so pure, where I was being very self-grasping, you'll say. And I looked out the window and I just saw the world. And both are true. It just relates to the purity of our mind. In the same way, this bodhisattva vows, plural, sentient beings are numberless, I'll save them. The teachings are infinite, I'll learn them. Delusions are endless, I'll see through them. The Buddha way is difficult, I'll walk the path. Whether we do that work or not is simply a manifestation of the purity of our mind. We don't need to go anywhere else. We don't need to find any arcane teachings. We simply need to practice in such a way, purify our minds in such a way that we start seeing opportunities to be a bodhisattva where we are. We start seeing opportunities to save all beings from suffering, including ourselves, where we are. Even if it's as simple as, I'm tired, I have to get up early, I'm going to bed early. Again, it sounds stupid, it sounds so simple, so easy, but how many times do we stay up late knowing we have to get up early, and now we cause ourselves suffering because we didn't get enough sleep, and we're groggy, and we're cranky, and we need an energy drink just to get out of bed. Simple things like that. I'm tired, I'm going to sleep. I'm hungry, I'm going to eat something nutritious. My mind isn't in a good place. I'm going to sit and meditate. That's how we practice the Bodhisattva vow. That's how we live up to the example set for us by the Bodhisattvas, by the Kanaan, by the Jizo, by the Buddha himself. We see that in nurses and the work they do. We also see it in the conversation that I just read from Lion's Roar. And we also see it in our own work. This is why I always say that daily life is the practice. Whatever job we have, as long as it's not one of the 5 forbidden professions I mentioned earlier, apparently I need more tea. It's a chance to be a Bodhisattva. Whether we're a customer service rep, whether we're washing cars, whether we work in IT or healthcare, lawyer, doctor, you name it. We have the opportunity to benefit others simply by going to work every day. The way we earn a living is also our spiritual practice. Just to be blunt, people wouldn't be paying you to do that work if you were causing harm. So that's your opportunity to help others, for however many hours you're there that day. Nothing special, nothing extraneous, simply being who you are and embodying those vows I mentioned earlier. Saves you and saves all beings. How cool is that? How lucky are we? That all we need to do to be a Buddha, to be a Bodhisattva, is learn to be more of who and what we are. Amitabha. So that's the talk for today. I hope it was helpful. I'll now move into the Q&A portion of this evening's Dharma Sunday. This is your opportunity to ask me questions, either about the articles I read, about my Dharma talk, or about Buddhism in general. Also, if you have comments you'd like to share with the rest of the Sangha, you can do that. This is a live stream, so just type in the live chat and I'll be sure to respond. While we're waiting for those to come in, I have a few announcements. So Dharma Sunday happens every Sunday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's live streamed here at this channel, and this is where I chat with you about canonical Buddhist teachings and real-world events. So we talk about politics, we talk about pop culture, really, whatever grabs my eye that week, to be honest. But we also talk about in relation to the Buddha Dharma and how everyday life can be Buddhism if we look at it correctly. Again, having that right view, paying attention. On Wednesdays, the practice is a bit more involved and more traditional. That's meditation and sutra study, where we practice a 15-minute guided meditation, a reading from a sutra. Right now, we're doing the Nirvana Sutra. Then there's a Dharma talk followed by a Q&A. And that happens again live streamed at this channel every Wednesday, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. These teachings are offered at no cost, but if you'd like to make a contribution, information for that is in the description for PayPal and Cash App for this talk. If you'd like to do a deep dive into Buddhist training, you can check out my book, Perfectly Ordinary Buddhist Teachings for Everyday Life. There's a free link to a sample chapter of the book also in the description for this talk. So let's see. Our first comment comes from Great Hermit. He says, or I should say, they say, "Hello, Sensei," followed by the bow emoji. Thank you, Great Hermit. Good to see you again. Rose C said, "Hello, Sensei. Thank you for your work." You also said, "You are a great help in my life, Sensei. You are appreciated greatly." Oh, wow. Thanks so much, Rose C. That means a lot. Good to have you here this evening. I really appreciate the encouragement you guys give me. This work is very beautiful. I enjoy it. Can't imagine my life without it, but it can be trying at times. So encouragement, like the last couple of comments, is not required, not needed, not fishing for them, but I do want to let you know it's appreciated. Thank you. Great Hermit said, "I finished your book. Congratulations. That's wonderful. I hope you enjoyed it." I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I believe it's Philbo1701 said, "As a nurse, I appreciate your words and teachings," and 3 bows. Well, as someone who's been cared for by nurses, I appreciate your work very much. Thank you very much for being here this evening. Cerberus said, "This is a great opportunity to end suffering for all beings indeed." Yes, it is. Great insight. Absolutely. Great. Thank you for being here. Great Hermit said, Happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers watching. David Oliver said, just so you know, the link to your book does not work. Well, that sucks. You also did the bow emoji. So thank you, David, so much for that. Yikes. Thank you for letting me know. Here, let me just pull up the link. I'm not sure why the other link isn't working, but I'll get that for you guys. Samsara always gets us one way or another, but that's just an opportunity to practice the Dharma. All right, there you go. It's in the live chat. Hopefully that works for everyone. And that's the Amazon link. I only put that in because there's a link there. If you want to read a sample, you can. But there's the link. Hopefully that works. Thanks again, David, for letting me know. Cerberus said, are there any books that you'd recommend to structure one's practice? So I highly recommend the Mahayana Buddhist Sutras. That's what we study here in this Sangha. So the Lotus Sutra, the Shurangama Sutra, the Nirvana Sutra, the Vimalakirti Sutra. If you watch past meditation sutra studies this year, we've done the Vimalakirti Sutra, the Lotus Sutra. We're doing the Nirvana Sutra right now. And we also just finished the Awakening of Faith Sutra. So if you watch those past talks, you can get a taste of those. In terms of books I'd recommend starting with, I'm a big fan of, let's see, I'm going to cheat and look over at my bookshelf. The problem is my bookshelf is all the sutras. Everyday Zen by Charlotte Joko Beck was a book that was very instrumental in my life. Highly recommend that one. Let's see. I'd probably start there. The Dhammapada is also good. That's a list of sayings or aphorisms that the Buddha offered, and it can give you a good taste of the Dharma. Right, so I'd probably start with those two. Everyday Zen by Charlotte Joko Beck, and then also the Dhammapada is quite good as well. Alison Griffin said, the natural evolution toward bodhicitta of all the schools is one reason I do not judge any of the schools. Everyone starts at a different place, but move toward the same. Namo Amida Butsu, with the bow emoji. Namo Amida Butsu. So true. And, great insight as always, Allison. So my training was in the Pure Land and Zen Buddhist traditions, but I am non-sectarian as a Buddhist minister. Meaning I don't belong to any particular school or lineage, because I've had teachers from multiple lineages. And I found that myself as well, 100%, that if you really dive into the sutras, then what you find is that the teachings all lead towards bodhicitta, but in different ways. And I think, frankly, that's because the teachings are being offered by human beings. So Soto Zen, for example, places a very strong emphasis on seated meditation. And I have a strong idea, no evidence of this, but a strong idea that that's because the founder of Soto Zen, Dogen, was probably very big on seated meditation. He liked that, so that's what he taught, right? If you look at Pure Land Buddhism, founded by Honen and Shinran in Japan, or popularized by them, I should say, there's a strong emphasis on chanting. And strong idea, no evidence, but they probably just enjoyed chanting quite a bit, so that's what they taught. So I think you're right on, Allison, that all the teachings start at different places because people start in different places. So it'd be wrong to have only one type of Buddhism. We need multiple types so that everyone can find what they need, whether you like chanting, sutra study, seated meditation, etc. I think it's very interesting, in fact, when we were reading the Lotus Sutra, the emphasis that the sutra places on skillful means. That the Buddha never lies, but he offers teachings based on the time, the place, and the person in front of him. So how he teaches me perhaps may not be the same as how he teaches you, because we're two different people who need different things. So I think that's fantastic, and I think that's a very good insight. Michael Hill said, "Hello, Sensei," with the bow emoji. And he said, "Thank you." Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that very much. Good to see you. Sat 12. Have you compared eyes open meditation to eyes closed? Yes. Yes, I have. In my own practice quite a bit. And this is something that people like to argue about online for some reason in Buddhist forums. Should your eyes be open? Should your eyes be closed? I don't think it matters as much as people think. I think that's one of those instances where it's more important that you meditate than the position of your eyes. Now, in Soto Zen, if we look at the instructions that Zen Master Dogen gave, he specifically said that eyes should be closed and pointed downwards at a 45-degree angle. So if you're a Soto practitioner, you're facing the wall, eyes are open, pointed down. But in general, in my own practice, eyes open, eyes closed seems to be about the same. Generally, I sit with eyes closed unless I'm leading a talk. But even as I sit with eyes closed, sometimes during longer meditations, I'll open my eyes over time, right? So I personally believe that you should keep your eyes in a position that helps you meditate, right? Because let's say you do better with your eyes closed, but you're trying to keep them open, but it's hard, so now you're not meditating because you don't want to keep your eyes open. Well, that's not useful. So eyes open, eyes closed, I like to leave that to the individual. But it's a good question because, like I said, it comes up quite a bit in Buddhist forums. So it's something that should be discussed. Cerberus said, "Thank you for your answer, Sensei." Thank you. Great Hermit asks, how does someone become a demon? What's their karma? So there is a long list of exactly what you have to do to end up in different realms. And I haven't memorized the list, but essentially to become a demon, to end up in a hell realm, you have to do some fairly terrible things. So this is murder, this is things of that nature. Right? You really, really have to screw up to end up in the hell realm. More generally, people end up in the hungry ghost realm because they're greedy, or they end up in the animal realm because they're very lustful and given to their animal desires. To end up as a demon, you'd have to do some pretty terrible things. Though I do think it's noteworthy that in Buddhism, even people who do terrible things, they do go to hell. We have hell realms, but they're not there forever. You're essentially there to burn off the negative karma, which granted takes eons, multiple kalpas, but eventually you do get to a point where you're able to leave. So, but yeah, just you'd have to do something pretty terrible along the lines of murder. The sutras specifically talk about murdering your parents. So the death of killing your mother, killing your father, something along those lines. Sat 12 asks, what is your opinion of the meditation technique of noting? The one that some Theravada monks do, where if a thought or feeling arises, you label it with a word in your mind. I think it's great. I think it's useful. There are multiple of meditation techniques out there. I think it's important that we experiment to find the one that works best for us. I personally prefer focusing on the breath, anamanapati, anamanapati. I think that's how that's pronounced in Sanskrit, but focusing on the breath as a form of meditation. But I think noting is also useful. We see our thoughts, we label them for what they are, and then we come back to whatever our focus is. I think it's useful because what it does is it creates that space between us and our thoughts. So I'm not angry, I'm experiencing anger, that sort of thing. So I think it's a terrific practice. It's certainly one that was taught by the Buddha. We can find it in the sutras. So whether we do something like silent elimination or we do something like Vipassana technique, like noting, I think they're both wonderful. Philbo1701. I'm a Soto practitioner, just wondering how different the Pure Land schools are from the Zen schools. Not very, in my impression. They look very different on the surface, but in my opinion, they're not that different, honestly. It's simply another focus of concentration. So in Soto Zen, you're told to think not thinking, right? So you don't even, for an advanced practitioner, you don't even focus on the breath. You simply sit and just let your mind do whatever. We do have a stronger focus, or I should say a more straightforward focus in Pure Land Buddhism, in terms of you're focusing on the chant, you're focusing on Amida Buddha, you're focusing on the qualities of the Buddha. But I think the idea is the same, to strip down that sense of self, to realize that we are one with all living things. I can't find anything that's totally different between the two schools. Even the teaching of Amida Buddha, if we have a true understanding of Amida, we understand we are Amida Buddha. So we talk a lot about the self-power in Zen versus the other power of Pure Land. That's a difference. But even there, if we truly understand self-power, we understand there's no self, there's just us, right? And the same thing with other power. If we truly understand other power, we understand Amida, we realize, oh, there is no Amida, there's just us. They're just symbols that we use to focus our practice. So on the surface, there are some differences, but I think the goals and the focuses are more or less the same. And it's also interesting because in Chan Buddhism, Pure Land and Zen teachings are essentially one and the same. So if you go into a Chan Buddhist temple, one of my teachers, Venerable Shiying Fa, was a Chan Buddhist monk. We had the chanting hall where we chanted. Amongst other things, we chanted Nimbutsu, but we also had the meditation hall where we sat and did silent illumination. And they were simply seen as two parts of the same practice. It's really only in Japan where they really separate it out into two separate things. And then in the United States, that separation has more or less stayed. But in reality, like I said, the teaching techniques are different, but underneath the hood, very similar. I agree. Great Hermit asks, what's the difference between being a demon and being a hell being? There's no difference. They're the same. Sat12 asks, so in focusing on the breath, do you focus on the repetition of it like a rhythm, or do you notice how each breath is different, or both? So, and we actually do this at the beginning of our guided meditations on Wednesday. The focus on the breath, as I teach it, is we focus on the feeling of the inhale and exhale. So the physical sensations of the breath. And there's also a technique as well. So we're breathing in and out through the nose. And on every inhale, we extend the belly button slightly to extend the stomach cavity, allow the diaphragm to drop, get a big lung full of air that way. And what that does, that breathing technique I just mentioned, plus the focusing on the physical sensation of the breath, it sends signals to our body that we're calm, that we can relax, that it's safe, kind of hijacking that fight, flight, or freeze response that we normally inhabit. Versus when we're breathing in and out of the mouth, that's a very excited, oh, something's about to happen, right? That's why when you exercise, you automatically start breathing out of your mouth. That's engaging your sympathetic nervous system, so it's go, go, go. The breathing in and out of the nose engages the parasympathetic, which is the calming part of our nervous system. So we breathe in and out through the nose, extend the belly button on every inhale, and focus on the physical sensations of the breath, be that the extension of the belly and relaxation of it, or the physical sensation of air going in and out of our nostrils. Good question. Alison Griffin said, I like how a Pure Land priest described the chant as one of gratitude. Yes, I like that a lot. And it is one of gratitude. We're expressing gratitude for a number of things, for Amida, for our own enlightened nature, for the world around us. I personally like to chant Nimbutsu, Namo Amida Butsu, every time I eat. Right? Nothing big, nothing fancy, just 3 times Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, to express gratitude for the food or the drink that I'm about to enjoy. So yes, I do it like that. Nimbutsu as an expression of gratitude is wonderful. Sat12 asks, have you ever tried gazing meditation, like with eyes fully open and concentrating on a point on the wall? I have tried that. I honestly wasn't very successful. It's a perfectly legitimate practice. I think it's great. It doesn't work for me very much, because as I start gazing at the wall, like my eyes do weird things and they don't focus correctly, and I start thinking more about whether I'm focusing correctly than I do about the actual meditation itself. But it's a perfectly legitimate practice, just one I haven't had much success with it. Great Hermit asks, why are Ashura higher than the human realm but lower than the gods? What are Ashuras? Ashuras are essentially demigods, or I've heard them described as angels. They're essentially beings. They have celestial powers, but they're also they're still given over to human emotions, primarily anger. So you could think of them as being like demigods or angels. Any other comments or questions this evening before we break? Great Hermit asks, why do some beings have supernatural powers but not humans? That's just their karma. Why are some people tall and some people are short? Different people have different karma. Same thing. Philbo1701 did 3 bows, followed by the smiling emoji. Oh, thank you, Philbo. I appreciate that so much. You're very kind. Sat12 said, I tried gazing meditation with the same things happening you described, but at a certain point they stop and you lock in. Okay, very cool. Interesting. So maybe I should have just stuck with it a bit longer. But wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. I always love when people share different practices that they've enjoyed, because it almost provides more fuel for the fire for other people's practice. So I guarantee someone's reading this right now. It's like, I need to try gazing meditation. So that's very cool. I'm glad you locked in that way. Great Hermit said, will you be conducting Buddhist holidays on your channel, such as the Ulambana? And also asks, have you studied Nichiren Buddhism? So no, I've not studied Nichiren Buddhism, though I do have good friends who are Nichiren Buddhists. But it's not something I've personally trained in or practiced myself. And in terms of Buddhist holidays, I've given a lot of thought to that. Then the question becomes, which holidays do I want to include on the channel, things of that nature. I could see it happening eventually, but to be honest, I'm a little overwhelmed. I have a lot of projects happening, but I could certainly see where we have ceremonies and whatnot around Buddha's Enlightenment Day, Buddha's birthday, things of that nature. So yeah, probably in the future, I think that will be the case. All right, well, looks like that's it for this evening. Oh, nope. Do you have, Sat 12 asks, do you have any interest in reaching out to the Black community to learn Buddhism? So yes, I do. Yes, I do. I do feel like the Black community, people of color as a whole, unfortunately, have a tougher time finding the Dharma. So one of my hopes in having this online forum is to create a venue that is more accessible to as many people as possible, be it disabled people, be it people of color. I just want everyone to have access to Buddhism who wants access. So that's one of the reasons I focus on the online forums, be it my blog, be it this channel, and then it's not online. Well, it is online because there's Kindle, my book, etc. One of the problems I find in Western Buddhism, sometimes called the upper middle way, is because it does require money. And I say that as someone who's spent a lot of money to receive this training at times. To go on retreat, and you have to go to the retreat center that's in the middle of nowhere, and you have to take time away from work, and Buddhist books. One of the reasons I started meditation and sutra study on Wednesdays is because it can be expensive to buy Buddhist books. So I'll buy them and then I'll share them with you guys, is the idea. So I definitely want to make the Dharma as available to as many people as possible. And that definitely includes the Black community, because I feel like there are many groups that are being left out. So that's a wonderful question. Great Hermit said, thank you, Sensei, followed by the bow emoji. Thank you, Great Hermit. Wonderful to have you here. All right, anything else before we end? Just as a reminder, if you enjoyed tonight's chat, please make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel. That way you'll be notified when we post in the future. Sat 12 said, in Thailand, less money is needed. Yeah, it is. Because in part, Buddhism is just more flourishing in Thailand. It was there before it came to the United States. The monks still do alms rounds. So like you said, it's very, I don't want to say it's easy, but it's more accessible. Because the monk comes, they do alms round, you make an offering, they give you a blessing in return, you can ask questions, so definitely takes less money in Thailand, I agree. Great Hermit asks, which Buddha do you like to pray to? Shakyamuni, Amida, Maitreya, etc. Generally, I pray to Amida Buddha. That's the Buddha I resonate most with. I should put the asterisk here that all the Buddhas are the same. They're simply different aspects of the Buddha body, but philosophy aside, I generally pray to Amida Buddha. Good question. We should all find the Buddha that works for us. Sat 12 said, you could create a more Western uniform. I've thought about that. So when I first decided I was going to do these online talks, I thought a lot about just, jeans and t-shirt, right? Because that's what we're wearing or something like that when we're generally practicing the Dharma, is our regular street clothes. The reason I chose to wear my robes and my okesa is for a couple of reasons. One, I am teaching. I'm offering a service to you, so I feel like I need to be more formal in that way, just as a sign of respect to the audience. Also, just wanting to pay homage to the Buddhist teachers who came before, who offered me teachings. So this is a way to offer respect to you, to offer respect to them. And then also it's a reminder to me that I'm doing important work right now. I need to pay attention. Just like if I went to an office and I wore a suit, okay, I'm wearing a suit, I'm here to do something. Same thing, I wear my robes, I'm here to be a minister, I'm here to teach the Dharma. So this needs to 100% be my focus. Same thing when I do chaplaincy work at, demonstrations, protests, etc. I want people to be able to recognize me as a Buddhist minister so they can come to me for aid or guidance if they need it. And I also need to remind myself that I'm here representing more than just Alex. I'm representing the Dharma as a whole, and I need to behave in such a way. So I'm not against the idea of a more Western uniform. I know some teachers like to wear their regular clothes, but those are the reasons I choose not to. Great Hermit said, I am reading Avatamsaka Sutra. That's wonderful. We will get to that eventually this year, so you will be way ahead of the curve. That sutra is very powerful. I haven't read it in some years, so I need to go back to it, but it's beautiful. Then you said, who's the Vairochana Buddha? That's a good question. I'm honestly not that familiar with the Vairochana, so I would not be able to answer that, unfortunately. But I will do some research on that, and I'll get back to you next week. That's a good question. I honestly don't know. That's something that's outside my experience. Great Hermit said the Avatamsaka Sutra is very, very long. It is very long. Yes. The Flower Garland Sutra is also very long. We're going to get to that at some point. And with the longer sutras, I'm wondering maybe instead of 6 weeks, we do 12 weeks to really dig into them because they're long. But there's a lot of good information there. Great Hermit asks, what's the difference between the Western and the Eastern Pure Land? There's no difference. I know the sutras say that Maitreya will arise in the West. I think that was really more skillful means to give people something to grab hold to of where will the Buddha be, right? But in truth, the Pure Land itself is no different in the West or the East. Sat 12 said, a uniform could look formal, but be a hybrid of East and West. For instance, a suit jacket, but with the item around your neck at the same time. That's a possibility, for sure, a suit jacket with my okesa. I'd have to think about that some. I have given talks in the past where I did wear a suit jacket and my okesa. I was speaking in a church at that point, and it seemed to work well. So that's something to think about. Yeah. Sat 12 asks, what is the longest you ever meditate in one session and what did you experience? Good question. So the longest I ever sat in meditation without getting up or doing walking meditation, I assume you're just talking about seated meditation. It was at Buddhist Insights, which is an organization. The abbot there is named Bhante Sudaso. He's a Theravadan Buddhist monk, though he's also ordained as a Soto Zen priest as well, I believe. Very deeply realized individual. He has a monastery in New Jersey. I forget where exactly, but it's called Empty Cloud Monastery, if I remember correctly. They weren't at the monastery when I sat a retreat with him. But anyway, point being, deeply realized individual. And as part of a New Year's Eve retreat that we were doing, we sat to bring in the New Year's in the same way that the Buddha sat through the night when he realized enlightenment. So we sat for 3 hours without stopping. And what I experienced there was a lot of physical pain. My back hurt, my legs hurt. I experienced the full range of human emotion. I was angry, I was sad, I was peaceful. It was very challenging. I never sat that long before. But something that he said stuck with me, which is that the first time he did this practice, he experienced all the same physical sensation. Felt like little people were stabbing his legs with knives. But his mind changed. And even though he experienced the physical sensations, they didn't bother him, right? He just wasn't so dialed into what his body was feeling in that moment. So he was peaceful. And I experienced a very, very, very small piece of what he described, right? So I don't want to lie to you guys. I shifted in my seat, right? But over time, what happened is eventually I got to the point where it's, okay, I'm just going to sit here for a while and it's going to hurt, but it'll be okay. And I just have to be okay with the fact that I'm going to be uncomfortable for a while. And what that practice did, even though I wasn't 100% successful with it, I didn't sit like a stone like Bhante did, is that it showed me that life works a lot in that same way. That just because I'm uncomfortable doesn't mean I need to react in that moment. I can be angry, I can be sad, I can be cold, hot, whatever. And sometimes it's okay to just say, you know what, this is going to suck for a while, and then it'll get better. So that practice was very instrumental for me. And I thank Bhante Sudaso profusely for making it possible, because it taught me how to deal with suffering. Specifically, how to practice acceptance during times when I can't change what's happening, right? Sometimes it's cold and you can turn up the thermostat. Sometimes it's cold and you don't know where the thermostat is, right? Sometimes you're sitting and you're on the subway, let's say, so you can just get up and stand for a while. Sometimes you're sitting and you're meditating, so you're not allowed to move until the bell chimes. So you just have to sit there for a while and be uncomfortable, but that's okay. So 3 hours is the longest I've ever done. That said, I don't think that, so it was very instrumental to me to do that. I learned a lot, but I don't want to make it seem like that's something you have to do, right? Meditating for 1 minute a day can be very, very instrumental. You can learn a lot. So that's what I suggest. Start with 1 minute a day and see what happens. John asks, what strategies do you use with chaplaincy in difficult situations? Well, first off, John, thank you for your comment. I think this is the first one I've had from you. Good to have you here. And one strategy I use when doing chaplaincy work is I wear my robes. And like I said, that's a good reminder of what I'm doing, why I'm there, especially when I'm doing demonstrations, because I feel the same emotions everyone else does. I feel anger, I feel scared, right? And what these robes do is they limit me in a way, right? So if I want to behave unskillfully, they stop me because I see my robes and, oh, wait, I'm not just Alex right now. I'm Sensei Alex Kakuyo. And whatever I do in this moment reflects on 2,600 years of Buddhist teachings. So we're not going to disgrace that or dishonor that by acting unskillfully. So this is one strategy I use. When dealing with other people, however, I spend a lot of time, frankly, just offering comfort. So maybe I like to carry a book bag and I have food and water in that, and I offer that to people if they look thirsty, if they look hungry. What else? I'll teach mindfulness training. So I've done that with groups where I teach mindfulness to demonstrators, because when you're demonstrating, like, that's a very visceral thing, right? So how do I stay calm? How do I stay centered? So I'll teach breathing techniques, things of that nature. That's primarily what I do. People don't go to demonstrations because they want to learn meditation, right? So generally we're not sitting in the grass chanting, but I'll do things like that. Sometimes my chaplaincy work has been counseling people when a loved one has died. There's a ceremony in Pure Land Buddhism called Makugyo. And what that is it's literally death guidance. So someone has died and you're chanting to call the Buddhas to gather their body and their soul and take them to the Pure Land. So doing ceremonies like that, offering counseling, pastoral counseling, not therapy, things like that. Sat 12 said, who are your favorite few monks or people that speak on Buddhism on YouTube? So Bhante Sudaso is truly wonderful. Definitely check out his channel, Buddhist Insights. Robita Corden is wonderful. She's a Vajrayana Buddhist nun. And she said something, you talk about turning words. She said something a few years ago. This is very early in my practice. It changed my life. She was doing a talk for Google, and she said, no one's responsible for your mind but you. Not your mother, not your father, no one. You're responsible for your mind. And that just blew me away because I've been living my life in such a way where, if only other people would behave correctly and this person did this and that person did that, and if only they would, act better, then I'd be happier, right? And that just led to all kinds of suffering. But those few words, no one's responsible for your mind but you, just put me years ahead in my practice. So I'm very grateful to her. Not sure if she has a YouTube channel or not, but just go Google her, check her out. I'm sure the Google Talk is still up somewhere. Those are the only monks that come to mind that I can think of. Brad Warner is a Soto Zen priest. He has a channel that's really good. So I like watching his talks. He trained with Gudo Nishijima in Japan, and he has a center in LA. So those would probably be the three people I watch the most. Let's see. Sorry, I lost my place. Great Hermit asked, or said, Sem Rinpoche. Oh, cool. Interesting. Not familiar, but I'll have to check them out. Sat 12. Do you have your greatest insights while meditating, or do you consider it a practice only? I definitely have some good insights while meditating, or actually not during meditation, but after meditation. So generally what happens is I meditate and it calms my mind to the point where I can practice right view better, right view being the first noble truth of Buddhism. And now I can see the world clearly. I can see my problems clearly. And sometimes I see I'm making things a lot harder, a lot more complicated than I need to. Sometimes I realize that the way I was looking at thing was totally wrong. And, actually, I should have done that better. They're not the problem, I'm the problem. So it's hard to see that in the moment, right? But after you meditate, after you clear your mind, suddenly you see the world more clearly. So I've had some deep realizations during meditation, but it's generally after meditation where the world really starts to make sense for me. That about 30 minutes after, I'd say. Great Hermit said, have you studied Qigong? No, I have not. No, I haven't. I've read about it, but I've never practiced it myself. Let's see, Sat 12 said, hit the thumbs up button, please. Yes, please do. I'd appreciate that. And thank you, Sat 12, for saying that. You also said, how important have teachers been in your practice? And then please spell your favorites on Buddhism slowly so I can write it. Thanks. Okay, so teachers have been very important, very important. So my primary teachers have been Reverend Koyo Kubose, Venerable Shi Ying Fa, and Pope Sa Link Rhodes. So Pope Sa Link Rhodes is a teacher in the Kwanum School of Zen, which is Korean Zen. Venerable Shi Ying Fa is a Chan Buddhist monk. And Reverend Koyo Kubose is a Pure Land Buddhist minister, though his practice now is non-sectarian. And he's the president of the Bright Dawn Center of Oneness Buddhism. So I'd say very important. All three of those individuals have had a very profound effect on my life. Definitely would not be here without them. And then that's not including the books I've read on Buddhism, written by teachers like Charlotte Joko Beck, Brad Warner, the retreats I've sat with people like Bhante Sudaso. So I would say teachers aren't required to practice Buddhism, but they can be helpful. Absolutely. So if you have the opportunity to practice with a teacher, you definitely should. Please spell your favorites on Buddhism slowly so I can write it. Thanks. Okay, sure. So Bhante Sudaso, Bhante, Sudaso, Sudd. Now I can't spell. I believe it's Hasso. Robina Corden is Robina Courtin. Oliver said, "Hi, Sensei. Sorry if this has been asked before. It's my first time here. What branch of Buddhism do you practice, and what brought you to it?" So my practice is rooted primarily in the Pure Land and Zen Buddhist traditions, though my practice is primarily non-sectarian, meaning I don't hold to any particular lineage or teacher. What brought me to Buddhism as a whole essentially was really just desperation. I tried everything else. I tried money, cars, success in corporate America, and nothing seemed to be working for me. So out of desperation, not knowing what else to do, I came to Buddhism. The exact moment I realized something was wrong and needed to change was I was working a sales job, which I was very good at. I made a lot of money, and I won a sales competition. So part of the competition is they gave me a large bonus check, several $1,000s. And they did the whole thing where they give you the big show check and they took a picture, and then afterwards they gave me the paper check to take home and eventually take to the bank in cash. And I went home with my check and I sat on the couch, and I was desperately sad and lonely at the time, right? But I was so sold on this idea that money would make me happy. So I sat on the couch all night and I looked at that check, and I waited and waited and waited for happiness to come, and it never did. No surprise. So as a result, I started to look to other things, dabbled in various spiritual traditions until I finally found Buddhism. Walked into the Indianapolis Zen Center, which I mentioned earlier, and it just felt like home. Not to say that everything was easy. Seated meditation was very hard for me because I just didn't have very much flexibility in my legs. And the practices, the bowing, the chanting were all very strange to me, but it just felt like I was doing the right thing. So that's how I came to Buddhism. But the teachings I offer here at this channel are rooted primarily in the Mahayana Buddhist tradition, and a subset of that would be the Pure Land and Zen Buddhist traditions. So thank you for your question. Well, thank you for being here. John S. said, "Thanks for your response. How do you think we should balance helping ourselves and helping others?" That's a good question. I think first we have to realize that there's no real separation between helping ourselves and helping others. If we're truly helping ourselves, then by necessity, we're also helping others, and vice versa, right? So just using a very simple example, if we choose to go to bed early, so we get plenty of sleep, instead of staying up all late watching movies, obviously helps us, right? We wake up, we're refreshed, but at the same time, we're also helping others because we wake up and we're in a good mood and we're more focused and we're more relaxed. So we're interacting with them in a better way than we would if we'd stayed up all night and now we're tired and cranky, right? So if we're truly acting in a way that's helpful to us, we're also helping to benefit others as well. Now, I think what you're really getting at, however, with your question is, what do we do in situations where we're concerned that helping others will cause harm to ourselves? And I think it's important for us to remember that we are Buddhas and we are worthy of compassion, just like everyone else. So our compassion does have to start with ourselves. We need to ensure that we have food, shelter, medicine, and clothing. The 4 things that the Buddha said are requisites for life. And there's nothing wrong with ensuring that we have those things, as long as we're doing so in a way that's in accordance with the 4 Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. That being said, we can do those things in a way that's not only not harmful to others, but oftentimes can be beneficial, right? And that's where the practice comes in, right? So first, we make sure our own needs are being met, because if our needs are met, we can't meet the needs of others. And then we ensure we're meeting our needs in a way that is helpful and not harmful to others. So going back to right livelihood, we live in a capitalist system. We do. There's no escaping that, which means we have to earn money. But how we earn money, that's the practice. If we practice right livelihood, the 5th tenet of the Noble Eightfold Path, benefiting ourselves, putting money in our bank account also benefits other people, right? Now, if we're not practicing right livelihood, let's say we're practicing slavery. Let's just go all the way with this. There's some terrible karma associated with slavery. So we're harming other people, but we're also harming ourselves as well, right? So even though we think we're helping ourselves because we're buying and selling human beings and we're getting money, we're actually causing ourselves quite a bit of harm, mentally, physically, psychologically. So to answer your question more succinctly, we start by helping ourselves, but we ensure that the way we help ourselves does not harm other people as well. And if we do that, it more or less takes care of itself. But that's a very good question. I think that's a very common one in Buddhist circles. So thank you for asking that. Where was I? Okay, yeah. Great Hermit, have you studied Shinran? Actually, yeah, absolutely. Yes, I have. I think every Pure Land Buddhist has studied Shinran. For those of you who don't know, Shinran Shonin was one of the popularizers of Pure Land Buddhism in Japan. He and his teacher Honen, they actually experienced quite a bit of persecution for being Pure Land Buddhist, to the point where they were going to be killed, and then instead of being killed, they were just exiled. So Honen went to one end of Japan, Shinran went to the other. But yes, I have studied Shinran. I think his teachings are wonderful. I think Taisho, Taisho, where he talks about some of the misunderstandings around Pure Land Buddhism, is a wonderful text. Anyone who's interested in Pure Land should read it. Sat 12 said, have you watched Ask a Monk on YouTube? The monk's name is Utadamo Bhikkhu, Theravada from America, but studied in Thailand and Sri Lanka. I have not read or watched that actually, but I'll definitely check it out. Thank you for letting me know about it. Oliver said, thank you for the very sincere answer. Thank you for the very sincere question, Oliver. I appreciate it. Sat 12 asked, have you tried achieving happiness through the arts of invention of some kind? You also said, can one practice Buddhism and not believe in reincarnation or any type of afterlife? So, to your first question, yes. And I don't believe that invention is separate from Buddhist practice. If we're practicing anything correctly, then it can all be part of the Dharma and Buddhist practice. I think what changed for me is why I was inventing and what I was inventing. So right now I'm working to build a homestead where I hope to raise animals and grow food for my household. And I experience a lot of great happiness from that. Absolutely. But I believe the happiness comes from the fact that what I'm building, what I'm inventing is in keeping with the Dharma. Growing food, caring for the environment, feeding people. And because it's in keeping with the Dharma, I gain great happiness from it. So yeah, I think I have tried that, and I think you can be very successful at it. It's been my experience. You also asked, can one practice Buddhism and not believe in reincarnation or any type of afterlife? Yes, you can. And yeah, that's a short answer. Yes, you can. The longer answer is there are different Buddhist traditions that are more or less, I don't want to say welcoming, but it's easier to practice traditionally and not hold on to those things. I think the Zen tradition is more okay with that, I guess, because they just don't talk about the afterlife very much in Zen. They don't talk very much about reincarnation. Dogen mentions it a couple times in his writing, but it's just not a focus. So being a Zen practitioner and not believing in the afterlife or reincarnation, very easy. Secular Buddhism is all about that. That's more for the agnostic and the atheist types, and they're actually quite strict about not believing in reincarnation or the afterlife. So that would be another idea. Practicing Vajrayana Buddhism or Pure Land Buddhism without that belief would be difficult because it's really kind of a big focus. But yeah, Buddhism as a whole, yes, 100%. But depending on the tradition would decide how easy or hard that would be for you. So you probably want to find a tradition that's more akin to that. Great Hermit said, good luck with your homestead project. Thank you so much. That's very kind. Set 12 said, are you married? And if so, does your wife meditate? No, I am not I'm not married. I do have a girlfriend, and she does meditate. Yes. Great Hermit, what are your recommended books for intermediate and advanced practitioners? Oh, these book questions are always tough for me because I never know how to answer. I would really say for intermediate and advanced practitioners, I can't recommend the sutras enough. Just because, and admittedly, the sutras can be tough for beginners because this is a different culture, this is a different language. With some of them, they're very philosophical, so the way the words are used are not ways that we're used to in the West. Which is why I do meditation and sutra study on Wednesdays, so I can kind of walk you through it. But for the intermediate and advanced practitioners, what I personally would do is read less of the secondary sources. And I say that as someone who wrote a secondary source in my book, Perfectly Ordinary Buddhist Teachings for Everyday Life. I think those books from Western Buddhist teachers like myself can be helpful. But once you feel like you have a good grasp of it, I really feel like that's when you should dive really deep into the sutras. Because even if you don't understand it completely, you would know enough where you know what questions to ask. So that would be my recommendation. Sat 12, you seem to have a gentle personality that fits with Buddhism. Have you always been relatively calm? No. Definitely not. So I was a very angry, very selfish, very greedy individual before I started practicing Buddhism. And the way Buddhism helped me was that it helped me realize how much suffering I was causing, not just for other people, but also for myself. And just seeing that, oh, wow, I had a bad day and it was completely my fault. because I spoke rudely to this person and I spent my money unwisely, so now I don't have it for this other thing I need. And what Buddhism did was it allowed me to see the karma of my actions. And being able to see the karma of my actions clearly is what really sold me, to use that word, on Buddhism. It's just that, okay, right view. Let's experiment with that and see if it works. Right speech was a big one for me because I was not very kind in the way I spoke to people. What happens if I practice right speech, which is the third tenet of the Noble Eightfold Path? And lo and behold, the Buddha 2,600 years ago knew what he was talking about. And when I was kinder to people, when I was gentler in my approach, in my life, not to say it was perfect, bad things still happened, but things went better than they had before. And then bit by bit, okay, right speech is working for me. What about right action? What if I stop eating meat? What if I stop drinking alcohol? What happens then? And lo and behold, again, life was not perfect. It's still not, but things got better for me. I suffered less and I caused less suffering for others. So, and on and on and on. So that's been my path. I was very angry, very selfish before I started practicing, but I think, the practice works on you. You can't bow in front of an altar 1,000 times. You can't spend 10,000 hours on the cushion without it changing you. So I guess it's changed me a little bit over time. Sat 12 said, so this being a capitalist society, do you have to make money not related to your Buddhist practice? No, you don't. So the Buddha said there were 5 professions that were forbidden for Buddhists. The karma associated with them were so terrible that just don't do it, right? This is the sale of intoxicants, the sale of poisons, slavery, animal butchery. Let's see, I'm missing one. Intoxicants, poisons, animal butchery, slavery, and the sale of weapons, right? Beyond that, he didn't exclude anything else. So anything else that's not one of those 5 is in keeping with right livelihood if we do it correctly. Correctly being in keeping with the Dharma, the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path. So whatever you're doing to earn money, as long as it's not one of those 5 things, is in keeping with the Dharma. So as a Buddhist, you can do it. You just have to do it in a way, again, that's in keeping with the teachings. And that just comes down to practice. I meant you personally. How are you surviving now? So I live primarily off of money I earn from my book, contributions from my channel. I also have a day job. The West, unfortunately, we can't survive completely off of the Dharma. Our society just isn't built that way. So I work in an office, and then I have other sources of income related to the Dharma. But I try to offer all of my teachings on a donation basis, which in part necessitates that I have a day job, but it also ensures that the teachings are available to anyone who wants them. So I'm fine with that. Hope that answered your question. Anything else this evening before we quit? Let's see. John, do you find it challenging to bring your Dharma knowledge into your work life? So I did for a time. And what changed for me was that I took a sabbatical, because for a long time, I thought I could not practice Buddhism and work a day job. I didn't think it was possible, because this being a capitalist society and corporate America being so terrible at times, I can't do this. So what I did was I spent 8 months and I lived and worked on organic farms. And during that time, I spent anywhere from 2 to 6 hours a day meditating and studying sutras. I was also working on the farm, so feeding the animals, cultivating vegetables, etc. And what I realized through that was that there's no escape from suffering. And what I mean by that is the same challenges that I had in my office job, I also had on the farm. Right? There were still cliques that formed. I still didn't necessarily work the hours I wanted to work. There were still politics where the owner of the farm liked one intern more than they liked another intern. So this person's getting special treatment. So what changed is I changed my mindset and started to get away from the how can I practice Buddhism separately from the world, and more how can I practice Buddhism within the world itself, right? How can I practice Dharma where I am, wherever that is? And now I don't find it challenging anymore, because instead of looking at this thing and thinking, this is terrible, I don't like this, I think, okay, I don't like this, this is terrible, how can I turn this into a teaching? Or how can I turn this thing I have to do, how can I do it in a way that's in keeping with what the Buddha would want? So these days I don't find it challenging, but that's because I'm actively working to not make it challenging. Everything is a teaching if we make it that way. But it took some time and some practice on my part to get to that point. But I mean, the Noble Eightfold Path, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. If we're creative with our lives and with our ideals, we can do this anytime, anywhere, including in our work life. Just take some imagination on our part. Okay, John, do you find, I already answered that. Sat 12, do some people try to challenge your way? My way of practicing the Dharma, I assume you mean. And then you also said, do you consider being a monk at a monastery? Okay, so I'll tackle the first question first. People have been very welcoming to my approach to the Dharma. I believe that this integration of spirituality with daily life is something that we're sorely missing in the West. Again, I believe it was you who asked earlier, do I want to make these teachings more available to Black communities? I think that's really going to be a necessity if we want to make these teachings more available to people of color, more available to, frankly, people who aren't wealthy and who have to have day jobs. Because for a long time in the West, Buddhism was taught as if you had to be a monk in order to do it right. And the monastic path is important, but the Buddha gave us the fourfold Sangha. So monks, nuns, laymen, lay women. So lay people traditionally have been empowered to teach the Dharma, and you don't have to be a monk or a nun to practice Buddhism. But I feel like that message got lost in the West. And I feel, at least my experience has been, that people are very welcoming to my approach to the Dharma because it's needed. Like you said, this is a capitalist society. We have to have jobs. Even if I wanted to practice Buddhism the way that the Buddha did and go on alms rounds, that's illegal where I live. I go to jail for panhandling, right? So we have to be practical in our approach. But this isn't something new necessarily that I'm teaching. If we go to Shinran and what he taught, he was teaching the same thing, almost 1,000 years ago. So I don't see it as something new necessarily, but it's more just reviving an old teaching. And for the most part, people have been very welcoming and accepting of it. So I've been very fortunate that way. And then you asked, did you consider being a monk at a monastery? I did consider that very deeply, in fact. But I did not like the motivation I had for becoming a monk. And being a monk, living in a monastery, again, I think it's a very deep practice. I think everyone should practice at a temple or a monastery for a short time at some point in their training because it can be so beneficial. It felt to me like I was trying to escape the world. Just like I was trying to escape when I went to live and work on a farm, right? I don't like this world I'm in, so I'm going to run away from it. So I considered it, but I just don't think my karma is a good fit for a monk's life. I think there's that seed of escapism, which isn't in keeping with the practice. So my focus is on learning to practice the Dharma where I am, wherever that might be. John says, you mentioned being treated differently than others. How did you make peace with that? Ooh, that's a good question. I don't think you ever fully make peace with that. However, one thing that was helpful for me was changing my expectations, right? So if we understand karma, we understand that people act in accordance with their habits. So like the roommate I mentioned earlier in the talk who made his oatmeal and made a huge mess and then walked out of the house, right? I don't believe there was anything malicious in his actions. I believe that just because of his karma, he wasn't paying attention to what was going on, right? Even though he was causing suffering for me and the other roommates through his actions. But by changing my expectations that, okay, this is just how this individual behaves, and I'm not going to get mad about it because this is just their karma. How do I work with this skillfully? And in that case, I'll just wash the dishes and sweep up the oatmeal myself. That helped. And in my day-to-day life, if I see that I'm not being treated the same as other people, one thing that's helpful for me is changing my expectations. Now, I want to be clear, this doesn't mean we allow ourselves to be mistreated. We stand up for ourselves when it's appropriate. We verbalize our needs and our desires, etc. Because again, we are Buddhas, we are deserving of compassion as much as anyone else. But in my life, it's also been helpful to change my expectations and just not expect so much out of people. To understand that they're hurting, that they're trapped in samsara just like I am, and that there's not necessarily a malicious intent to what they're doing. They're just suffering from bad habits. And what that's helped me to do is not hold on to negative feelings for quite so long. And also to be more compassionate towards people who are behaving in a way I don't like. Sat 12 said, Buddhism in America and meditation has gotten much more popular in the past 10 years. But are they teaching it properly? Honestly, I don't know. What does it mean to teach it properly? Was Shinran teaching Buddhism properly when he said we should place our faith in Amida Buddha and chant Namo Amida Butsu? Was Dogen teaching it properly when he said that our primary focus should be shikantaza, or just sitting? Was Padmasambhava teaching Buddhism properly when he went into the mountains of Tibet and Nepal and realized that there was a strong shamanic tradition there? So instead of turning away from that through the power of ritual, he subdued those deities, those shamanic archetypes there, and turned them into Dharma protectors. So I've softened my view quite a bit of what it means to teach Buddhism properly. Now, that doesn't mean anything goes. I want to be clear. If we look at the Four Noble Truths, if we look at the Noble Eightfold Path, those are, in my view, the core of Buddha Dharma. So any Dharma teaching we receive has to be in keeping with those. But that does leave us a lot of room for innovation, right? If we look at the Lotus Sutra and the focus that Buddha placed on skillful means, we give the teachings in a way that's appropriate to the time, the place, and the people in front of us, whatever that might look like. Right? So the way he taught a young mother who just lost her child was different than the way he taught a Brahmin who was there to challenge his authority as a spiritual teacher. but everyone got the teachings. So I feel the way we're teaching the Dharma is the way we're teaching the Dharma. Is it the right way? I think we'll see. In 50 to 100 years, we'll see what people think. But as long as it's in keeping with the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, I feel it's appropriate. And I want to say this, as long as it shows proper respect for the teachers that came before. That's very important to me, that we pay homage and respect to the teachers, the patriarchs, the matriarchs that made it possible for us to have these teachings, and that we're not dismissive of the people or the cultures that brought it to us. That's important as well. John said, great answer. I'll bow to you tonight. Oh, thank you, John. I'll bow to you as well. And I'm glad that was helpful to you. So, anything else? Any other comments or questions? We've gone a little longer than usual this evening. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Amitabha. Until next time.